Early on in his time in office, Rishi Sunak set out 5 key pledges and invited us to judge him on whether he met them. Tonight, after a difficult week, it looks like he is struggling to deliver. Cutting waiting lists? Well, not if today's junior doctors' strike goes on. Stop the small boats? Not really, as the controversial barge is evacuated of its few residents at the end of a challenging week. Grow the economy? Maybe, just according to new GDP figures. But why do we still lag behind other leading nations? The election is still many months away, but it is clear the Prime Minister has a lot of work to do to deliver on his promises. Also on News at 10 tonight. Hawaii is counting the cost of wildfires so hot they burned boats on the water. The best is yet to come. The Lionesses proclaim their confidence ahead of tomorrow's big game. Steve will be live in Sydney and... hip-hop at 50.
Hip-hop is huge. It's more than just a fashion. It's more than just 2 turntables and a mic. Hip-hop is just a way of life.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. The government's Small Boats Week has ended rather as it began, badly and in some embarrassment. And that is rather in line with how the rest of Rishi Sunak's pledges and priorities are tonight panning out. We'll come to the others in the headlines today in a moment. But first, the progress or otherwise on curbing channel crossings. Ministers had carefully planned a series of announcements this week, beginning with their flagship Bibby Stockholm barge finally being declared open. But on Monday, last-minute legal challenges ensured that the sum total of just 15, yes, 15 asylum seekers actually made it aboard. And even they weren't there long, along with a handful of others who had since moved in. Tonight, they've all been moved out again. A precautionary measure, we were told, following the discovery of Legionella bacteria in the water supply.
Just days after they arrived, they have packed their bags once again. Tonight, 39 asylum seekers were bussed off the barge and won't return for several weeks at least. They only started boarding the Bibby Stockholm on Monday, but they're being removed by the Home Office after a dangerous bacteria was discovered in the water supply.
I'm shocked and horrified that human beings can be endangered in this way. We were told that all of the checks were in place and that everything was supposed to be safe, and it quite clearly isn't.
The barge is part of the government's response to the migrant housing crisis, which is costing taxpayers £6 million a day in hotel bills. Last month, the Home Office was so keen to promote the vessel, they invited us inside for a tour. But the bacteria Legionella has been discovered, which can cause Legionnaire's disease, a type of pneumonia. The government say none of the residents are showing any symptoms and their health and safety is their priority. But those supporting the asylum seekers are worried about their welfare.
Some of them are very concerned. One of them phoned me up and said, is this really serious? Should I give you my family's phone number so you can let them know if anything happened to me because I've just drunk the water?
The barge, which can hold around 500 people, was meant to be a deterrent against small boat crossings. 100,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel since 2018. And yesterday alone, 755 made the journey, the highest daily figure so far this year.
No hate, no fear!
There's been considerable local opposition to the barge, and today's announcement has only added to that.
It all smacks of rushing it through, not really thinking about the well-being of people and doing things thoroughly and properly.
They need to call the whole thing off. It's ridiculous. It was a bad idea from the beginning.
The government once again has an empty barge and has been sorting last-minute accommodation for asylum seekers in peak holiday season. This was their big solution, and it is now in danger of becoming a huge embarrassment. Amy Lewis, News at 10.
Stopping the boats was, of course, just one of the Prime Minister's 5 big priorities. No fewer than 3 of the others related to the economy. Now, whether today's GDP figures were good news or bad depends largely on who you ask. Growth of 0.2% last quarter might not seem much. It's not. But it was slightly better than the total flatlining that had been predicted. Proof, the government says, of the economy's resilience. Others, though, put a less positive spin on things.
Inflation is high and interest rates are rising, but the British economy is still growing. It could be a lot worse, but this butcher's in Bristol will tell you it has been a lot better. They supply hotels, pubs and restaurants here, and their customers are tightening their belts.
Seems uphill since the pandemic. There's a slight change in what people are buying, so sort of more braising cuts or sort of the obscure cuts rather than the fillet steaks and the expensive things.
Down the road and Dave Kelly's steak is on the menu. Lunchtime trade looks good, but this restaurant isn't profitable and the owner is concerned.
We are very lucky if we are survive this couple of next coming 6-7 months. It's really hard.
The economy grew by 0.5% in June. That's more than was expected. The unusually warm weather helped to lift activity, so did the extra working day. Remember, there was a bank holiday in May to mark the coronation, although strike action affected output in June in the health sector. But the big picture is weak. Growth of 0.2% between April and June isn't going to leave anyone feeling much better off. And the UK economy has still not quite returned to its pre-pandemic size. The rest of the G7 nations have bounced back more quickly than we have. The French economy recovered the ground it lost 2 years ago, but the government is upbeat.
Well, I think what it demonstrates is that there's a lot more resilience in the UK economy than many anticipated at the start of the year. We saw the IMF upgrade their prediction for growth in the UK economy by 0.7%. That was unprecedented.
Jagjit Chadha runs the National Institute for Economic and Social Research.
What we're seeing is an economy that is stuttering.
He says low growth is a problem that predates the pandemic and that the British disease is back.
British disease is something that many people talked about in the 1970s. Just sluggish economic growth. A sense in which, practically speaking, year to year, people didn't see their living standards improving.
And is that where we are now?
I'm afraid that's where we are. What is clearly missing in the British economy is a commitment to public services. We are also an economy that underinvests, whether it's business investment or public investment. And I think our skills base needs to be built up as well.
Addressing these things will take years. Dave Kelly wants a return to the good times. He and the rest of us may have to be patient. A recession has been avoided, but the economy remains stuck in low gear. Joel Hills, News at 10.
Well, if those last 2 pledges look in pretty serious trouble, the promise to reduce NHS waiting lists is beginning to stretch out of reach. When Rishi Sunak made the pledge, there were 7.2 million people waiting for treatment, compared to just 2.5 million when the Tories first came to power. But there are now 7.6 million people on waiting lists, and as England's junior doctors began a 5th round of strikes this morning, the chances of cutting that number look slim, to say the least. Their walkout will continue until Tuesday.
Cops don't pay the bills. Cops don't pay the bills.
Frustrations from junior doctors could be heard all over today, like here in Norwich.
Don't pay the bills.
Further north in Leeds.
What do we want? Pay restoration. When do we want it? Now.
There was a warning in Carlisle.
The pay is inadequate and people are going overseas.
A plea in Durham.
Please do come back to the negotiating table.
And that same song in London.
Cops don't pay the bills.
As junior doctors in England walked out for their 16th day this year in strikes alongside consultants that have already cost the NHS £1 billion.
I am concerned about the impact the strikes are having on patients, and that's why I call on the BMA to end their industrial action. Junior doctors will receive up to 10.3%, and an average of 8.8% in terms of their pay deal.
That compares to nurses, ambulance workers and other NHS staff accepting 5% alongside a one-off payment of at least £1,655. Teachers took 6.5%, police and prison officers 7%. But junior doctors say 8.8% on average is not enough for them. They want over 35%. Teachers, nurses, other NHS staff, do you think you're worth more than them?
No, not at all. There's a difference between equity and equality. We've had a bigger pay cut than other professions, therefore we would need a bigger uplift to restore our pay. I believe every profession should have their pay restored. I can't speak for what they should and should not be doing. I'm not part of their unions. I'm a doctor in the BMA. I can only explain our strategy.
Inside Downing Street, they believe that now the Prime Minister has offered what the pay review body recommended, then the public might start blaming doctors for these strikes. But doctors, including those gathered here outside, are convinced that the finger of blame is still being pointed at the government. And it is true that in recent polls, support for junior doctors remains far higher than opposition. At the nearby hospital that sits in the shadow of Parliament, that backing could be heard from patients, like one who said strikes had meant his hip replacement surgery was cancelled twice, leaving him in agony.
No, the doctor's not to blame. No, doctors deserve everything. If they want to strike, I agree with it, but it's just so hard. It's hard.
They're striking for a good cause, so we're fully behind the doctors.
You don't blame them?
No, not at all.
Obviously, I want them to get paid as much as they can because they saved my child's life.
But ministers think support for these striking doctors could wane as the disruption continues.
And Anushka is here to talk about all this. Look, we said at the start he'd made these 5 pledges. He invited us to judge him on them. Obviously, there's a long way to go to the election, but how do we think he's doing so far?
Well, I think there is a mixed picture, and I'm going to start with the good news for Rishi Sunak. The centrepiece pledge is to halve inflation. That was looking very difficult, but there was a significant drop in June. If you were outside number 10 Downing Street that day, you'd have probably heard a sigh of relief. And to be honest, I think probably a sigh of relief next door in number 11 today when it comes to those growth figures. Yes, still very sluggish, as Joel said, but better than expected. I think the third economic one is very, very difficult. National debt, equivalent to over 100% of GDP. From my understanding, worried conversations around government about what they're going to do, including what they can cut in spending terms. We know there's going to be a big increase in the benefit bill in April. The Prime Minister really wants to protect pensioners, so lots of worries from disability charities that I speak to about whether benefits could be cut, particularly personal independence payments. Some warning that would be bad news. As for the other two, well, they said they'd stop small boats. Very clearly, they haven't stopped small boats. Yes, he's passed legislation, but critics would say Small Boats Week, which we've just had, was a chance for the government to shine a light on something that's not going very well. Their Vice Chair, Lee Anderson, says they are failing in this area. So they need to do better there if he wants to meet that pledge. As for the NHS, well, you just saw it. They really thought it would be easy to cut waiting lists. They did not expect persistent month after month doctors' strike. Hundreds of thousands of appointments have already been cancelled. The government knows this is only going in one direction. That's why Rishi Sunak is trying so hard to persuade people that the doctors are to blame for this. But as I said, the junior doctors still have really quite a lot of sympathy.
OK, discussion to be continued, I expect. But for now, Anushka, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's move on to the 50th state of the USA now, where only from above can the staggering scale of smouldering ruins be grasped. There is little left of the historic Maui town of Lahaina after wildfires tore through the island this week. At least 55 people have died, and survivors returning today to the charred remains of their homes struggled to describe their emotions.
Sunrise over the Hawaiian island of Maui. But this is all that remains of the historic town of Lahaina.
All over here.
Wildfires leaving behind them miles upon miles of destruction. Homes, businesses and landmarks, once part of Hawaii's rich culture and traditions, reduced to ashes by the fast-moving blaze. Even on the water, dozens of boats didn't escape as the fire, fueled by the strong winds of Hurricane Dora, swept through.
What we saw was the utter devastation of Lahaina. We walked from end to end today as a team and what we saw was likely the largest natural disaster in Hawaii's state history.
Thousands of people who have lost everything, their homes, their belongings and their livelihoods, are now living in shelters, hotels or their cars, but say help is not coming fast enough.
What do you guys need right now?
Food, gas, water, anything, clothes.
I'm a little worried because I have a 4-month-old and a 2-year-old. I have dogs and just the essentials.
Some aid, additional firefighting crews and kit have been flown from Honolulu to Maui. Yesterday, President Biden approved the declaration of a disaster, and US Vice President Kamala Harris says they're deeply concerned about what is happening.
We are coordinating federal resources to swiftly get there to support the work that has to be done, both in terms of recovery, but to just support the folks on the ground. It is tragic what has happened there.
The number of people known to have died is now at least 55, but the search for missing relatives and friends continues, with reports that up to 1,000 people are still unaccounted for. Liza hasn't heard from her dad or mum.
I wanted to force him to come with me, but he was very hard-headed and he didn't want to come. And he said that he's going to stay and wait for my mom.
And yet, among the destruction, Lahaina's 150-year-old banyan tree, a traditional gathering place, is scorched but still standing, a glimmer of hope that this island will recover. Martha Fairley, News at 10.
We've got a short break now, but there's still plenty to come on the programme. We have a special report on a growing number of young men with addictions to trading cryptocurrencies and the clinic that's open to help them. We'll talk to Steve live in Sydney ahead of England's World Cup quarter-final, and
don't push me, 'cause I'm close to the edge.
how hip-hop has shaped music for half a century. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. It may not exist in a tangible form, but trading in cryptocurrency is having an all too real impact on the lives of some investors. The sheer volatility of the market, with enticing gains for the lucky ones, brings with it the risk of simply enormous losses. Around 10% of UK adults hold some kind of digital currency, and as that figure has grown, so too has the number struggling with addiction, even to the point of requiring new specialist rehabilitation.
Here's how much I made in a week of trading crypto as a part-time.
Cryptocurrencies are not the future. They are already here. A financial phenomenon and largely unregulated. You can't hold a crypto coin. It exists only as code in an online world where they are also promoted by influencers who link them to a life of fast cars and fast returns. The reality for most crypto investors, though, is far from the glamour on social media.
It's just quick wins, but also quick losses. In fact, more losses, if I'm honest.
What do you estimate that you've lost?
Maybe about 20,000 this year.
This man has asked us to hide his face because his employers don't even know he's here, in rehab, being treated for crypto addiction.
When I first went down, I'd be like, oh, look, I need to make it up. So then I would take more risks, which eventually led me to nearly losing everything.
What do you mean by that? What was at risk?
My job, my relationships, friendships. I didn't spend any time with friends. I sort of became infatuated with the whole thing.
Castle Craig, deep in the Scottish borders, is home to the UK's first and only crypto addiction clinic. The number of people coming here for treatment is now rising, and we've been given access.
When you were trading like that, what was that emotional state?
It was horrible.
It was horrible?
Yeah.
Here they treat crypto addiction based on evidence it has more in common with gambling or even drugs than normal financial investments.
So the regulated stock market is not as volatile. With crypto, things are going up and down in seconds. So you're getting more and more of a rush. It's like, you know, a cocaine addict taking a line of cocaine. From what our research says, it's between 18 and 35-year-old young men.
Predominantly men?
Predominantly men. Most of them have very good jobs, you know, and are very clever people.
They think they know what they're doing.
They think they know what they're doing.
Data collected by the Financial Conduct Authority found 10% of all adults in the UK owned crypto assets last year. It's more than doubled since 2021. Almost half reported their crypto is now worth less. Another survey found 43% of people addicted to gambling also own cryptocurrency. A quarter have invested more to recoup their losses. 22% say they've been unable to pay essential bills, and over a fifth have felt overwhelmed by the situation.
Many people invest in financial markets safely, but there will always be a small percentage of people who are experiencing harm. So whether it's regulated as a gambling product or as a financial product, it's important that there are protections and support.
The UK government is refusing to regulate crypto like gambling. Instead, they want to bring more crypto here, making London a new hub for the industry. The Treasury declined our request for interview, but in a statement said, risks posed by crypto are typical of those that exist in traditional financial services, and it is financial services regulation rather than gambling regulation that has the track record in mitigating them. And yet, for the person investing, there is still no money back, and nowhere to complain if it turns out to be nothing like as advertised by the influencers. Peter Smith, News at 10, Glasgow.
And information about services offering support for those struggling with addiction is on our website. That's itv.com/news. Now, in a World Cup which England entered as one of the outright favourites, the road to tomorrow's quarter-final has proved surprisingly tricky. There was the scrappy start against Haiti, Keira Walsh's knee injury during the Denmark clash, and the less said about Lauren James's moment of madness on Monday, the better. But the players promised today the best is yet to come.
The Lionesses are beginning to feel at home here, and when you look at where they train, it doesn't take much to see why. Through to the last 8 by the skin of their teeth, they've already used up a huge dollop of luck, so now is the time to make it count.
I hope we don't have that much stress. We know, we've seen in this tournament that not one game is easy for anyone. It's so competitive. And that's the beauty of the game too. It's also the beauty of the growth of the women's football game. So yeah, just I hope we can decide it before that.
Red card for violent conduct! They'll have to do it without their star so far, Lauren James, banned for 2 games for her fit of frustration. Most England fans admit to pre-match nerves, but are also displaying uncharacteristic confidence.
We've gone Brisbane, Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane, and now we're back in Sydney. So yeah, all the way. Yeah.
So they better win tomorrow?
Yes, they better, yeah. No Lauren James, but there are other players in the squad that can do it, so they'll just need to step up.
What worries you the most about tomorrow?
The fact that Lauren James isn't playing. She played pretty well in the group stage and was vital for us. So yeah, the red card didn't help us, did it?
There is no bigger stage in this World Cup than Sydney's Olympic Stadium, and it's here where the Lionesses want to play the rest of their football in this tournament. The only unknown is whether that means 1, 2 or possibly 3 games.
Don't get me wrong, I don't think we've been bad by any means, but I think you've seen glimpses of what we're capable of, and we as a team know the standard that we want to get to, and we know that we can give more.
A win tomorrow would mean a 3rd successive World Cup semi-final for England's women. They've never gone beyond that before, but the bookies are predicting they'll do just that this time around.
Well, let's go live to Steve in Sydney tonight, or tomorrow morning as it is with you, Steve. It's fair to say the Lionesses haven't been at their best for much of this tournament. People seem agreed on that. But what's your own assessment of where they're at going into this big game?
Well, Tom, I think it's quite interesting, actually, because despite that patchy form that you talk about, they're still the bookies' outright favourites, not just to win the game later, but actually lift the trophy at the end of the tournament. By their own admission, they're not playing particularly well, and apart from the performance against China, they've really found goals hard to come by. And, of course, the performance against China was largely inspired by Lauren James, who we know is not available to them. And later on, they'll be facing something they haven't faced here yet in this tournament, and that is a hostile crowd. The Colombian fans will pack Stadium Australia. They're very noisy, and this is their first World Cup quarter-final, so this match to them is absolutely huge. The team itself, the Colombian team, as I said in my report, is a very physical one, so the Lionesses will have to make sure they're not intimidated by that. To a certain extent, this has been a World Cup of shock results. I mean, if you think about it, the two top-ranked teams in the world, the USA and Germany, are already back home. Obviously, all England fans here and at home will be hoping that trend doesn't continue later.
Steve, it looks like it's going to be a beautiful day where you are, so good luck to them, and speak to you tomorrow. And England's quarter-final match against Colombia is on ITV1 and ITVX, our streaming service, tomorrow morning. Coverage starts at 10:45 with kick-off at 11:30. Whilst England prepare for that big game tomorrow, back here the Premier League kicked off again tonight, and it doesn't look like the summer break has changed all that much. Title holders Manchester City and their star striker Erling Haaland took just 3 minutes to open the scoring in their game at newly promoted Burnley. Finally, we've all had parties that have got a little out of hand, but it is not often that they've spawned an entire musical genre. 50 years ago tonight, though, that's exactly what happened when a young New York teenager asked her brother to DJ at a back-to-school bash. Hip-hop was born, and in the decades since, its beats have provided the soundtrack to a complete cultural movement.
With a back catalogue bursting with iconic beats and some of the biggest names in the business, for 50 years now, hip-hop has been much more than a style of music. It's been a movement, a cultural phenomenon, and a catalyst for change.
What it did, it changed the way that people recorded music, because prior to that everyone wrote songs and played them, and all of a sudden you had records that were being made without musicians. They were just using a beat and people rapping over a beat.
Do you sell a lot of hip-hop records?
We sell a fair bit, but we probably sell more of the original records that were sampled in hip-hop.
It all began on this street in the Bronx, New York, when the then teenage DJ Kool Herc started spinning records at a party in the basement of his parents' apartment block. Since then, hip-hop has evolved and travelled all over the world.
But now we have UK rap. You've got a rap movement in Australia, so it's not just housed in America no more. Hip-hop is huge. It's more than just a fashion. It's more than just two turntables and a mic. Hip-hop is just a way of life.
These digital decks look a bit different from the analogue ones they would have been using back in 1973, but the way that this technology's been designed has been heavily influenced by the techniques that those early hip-hop artists were coming up with.
DJs back then were kind of, recognising that audiences were reacting to those funky little drum sections and just sequencing them one after the other. Then they started adding in extra little scratches or...
So your job is a bit easier now?
Yes. I mean, now, as I was saying before, these have got a loop function where you can literally just press, a single button and it will do a loop for you. But, that looping as a DJ sort of concept came from hip-hop.
And if the first 50 years are anything to go by, there's a lot more to come from hip-hop yet. Chloe Keedy, News at 10.
Feels like a pretty good place to end this Friday night. Hope you have a fabulous weekend. See you next week. But for now, good night. Thanks for watching.